Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. I am so excited to be here with you all, talking with my friend Carl. So if you go ahead and introduce yourself for us, Carl. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, my name is Carl Hjelmen. I'm a professor at Utah Valley University, and so um, I have a PhD in entomology, but I work in the biology department. I specifically work on things like genomes and bioinformatics, and so how we use computers to analyze biological data. But how I use insects is I do a lot of things from kind of the genetic aspect of things, specifically in how their genomes change over time, specifically from the aspect of how much DNA things have.
Mm.
So many of you might know that we are made up of DNA, these little letters that make up our genome, kind of the rule book for how we develop. They're AT, Cs, and Gs. And so we have many of these AT, Cs, and Gs. Humans have approximately 3.2 billion of these letters
Hmm.
that make up their genome. We consider ourselves to be pretty complex, and that makes sense. We look at the amount of DNA we have. We have about 20,000 genes in there that code for proteins, kind of the things that have jobs in our cells. And we have, things like the model fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster, actually has around 175 million of these letters, which
Mm.
is far fewer than the human, right?
Hmm.
So many people tended to think that having less DNA meant you were less complex, right? Or having more DNA means more complexity.
Right.
But if we really dig into the amount of DNA things have, there's a crazy amount of variation that exists. For example, there are grasshoppers that have 6 times the amount of DNA a human does.
Hmm.
So there are some grasshoppers with 18 billion of those A, T, C's, and G's.
Yeah.
And then even like the American cockroach has the same amount of DNA as a human does at around 3.2 billion.
Wow.
So what I do is I gather in information about how much DNA all these organisms have, and then I build their kind of evolutionary tree, the family tree of species,
Hmm.
and I try to identify kind of how these sizes and genomes are changing and what things they might be related to. So I tend to specialize in insect genomes, and so I look at hundreds and hundreds of species of things like flies or beetles or butterflies and kind of see what might be causing them to kind of expand or contract the amount of DNA that they have.
Wow. Yeah. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, but
Yeah.
yeah, I was actually reading this thing recently about it was recently discovered that the organism with the most genomes is the axolotl. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a really big genome. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of really bizarre things out there in terms of genomes, and things like the axolotl are just these crazy exceptions to all the rules that we know.
Yeah.
That's what I find all the time in biology. The students that I teach get kind of frustrated when they discover that all these rules they learn
Yeah.
in intro biology are thrown out the window when you start
Yeah.
talking about things like axolotls or plants, for
Yeah.
example.
And they're
Plants
rules.
just
They're rules,
just
not
do whatever they
laws,
want to.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's all exceptions. Yeah, it's crazy stuff.
Wow. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Let's talk about a little bit more about you really quick, and then we'll get back into that. But let's
yeah,
start with your schooling. Where did you go for your school, and what were some of the things you worked on throughout that journey?
yeah. So I actually grew up in South Dakota,
Okay.
very cold state, not a whole lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to that's where I went to high school, and then I actually went to my undergraduate in South Dakota. I went to a really small school called Augustana.
Okay.
It's now Augustana University. It was Augustana College when I went, so they got university status a couple years after I graduated back in 2013.
Cool.
So I have a degree in biology, a bachelor of arts in biology. So I actually have a liberal arts degree for my undergraduate,
Mm-hmm.
which was great. It allowed me to pursue some of my other interests as well, things like music and classical studies, mythology, as well as science.
Very cool.
But because it was so small, the school was around 1,700 students when I went. There wasn't a whole lot of options for kind of specialty of majors.
Mm.
So in the kind of what we consider to be the traditional sciences, you had like physics, chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
biology, and biochemistry.
Yeah.
And so I had never even taken an entomology class at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The only time that it had been offered when I was there, it conflicted with another course that I took. So I actually didn't consider myself an entomologist for quite a long time.
Okay.
But when I was working there, I discovered I really wanted to deal with evolutionary biology. So
Mm,
I tried to take my courses to kind of go along those tracks. And of course, insects are an amazing model for evolution and
right.
biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took opportunities as I had them. I did a research experience with one of my faculty members there that was biomedical. So I did stuff in a lab dealing with human blood.
Nice.
But one of the professors I had encouraged me to apply to what the NSF refers to as REUs, or research experiences for undergraduates.
Okay.
The NSF provides a bunch of money to allow for undergraduate students to get paid research experiences over the summer at different universities.
Mm-hmm.
And so they tend to focus on students that are from underrepresented groups or from schools that might not prioritize research as much and might focus more on the teaching aspect of things. So I applied to a bunch of those and ended up getting into one. I think it was called the Excite REU, which was entomology. It was at Texas A&M University in
Nice.
their entomology department.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent 10 weeks the summer of 2012 just getting fully immersed in doing research. I mean, it was 40 hours a week. They paid for our housing stipends, our travel to get there.
Nice.
They gave me an income. I think I got paid around $5,000 or so, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
to do research and learn cool things. And here's where I got to figure out what entomologists really were all about.
Mm,
I mean, I'd never been around so many people that were hardcore bugs,
right.
and it's really infectious, honestly. And this is actually where I met my PhD advisor. He was my REU mentor, my research experience mentor.
Hmm.
And so he was incredible as a mentor. And so I went back, finished up my last year in my biology program, and I applied for graduate schools and decided I wanted to go to Texas A&M in their entomology program to work with this PhD advisor. Again, more of an evolutionary biologist, but he was in the entomology department. He's actually a geneticist who happened to be in the entomology department.
Okay.
And so I got to take a bunch of entomology centric courses when I got in. I got a fellowship that allowed me to kind of cover tuition and payment, took a bunch of courses, learned how to teach entomology labs,
Nice.
and ended up doing my PhD there. And then a couple of postdocs dealing with bugs afterwards, some of those research positions after I got my PhD. So I spent probably, I guess it was about 8 years in College Station, Texas, dealing
Nice.
with bugs. So
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, really cool. So Texas A&M, what were some of those things that you worked on while you were there, for your doctorate?
yeah, so kind of what I mentioned earlier, I
Mm-hmm.
study a lot of genome evolution.
Yeah.
And so my PhD advisor is a population geneticist, and he kind of the world authority in estimating the amount of DNA bugs have.
Oh, really?
And so I did, it results in so many fun collaborations. We get to work with so many people around the world who
Mm-hmm.
want to sequence their genome
Mm-hmm.
for their bug of interest, but they need to know how much DNA it has so they can figure out like how much money are they spending? Did they put it together right? Right?
Mm,
Because how we sequence genomes is we take the genome and break it up into a lot of little pieces and then trying to piece together how they overlap to put it together.
okay.
It's kind of like putting together a crazy puzzle that we have no idea how big it is.
Yeah.
And so we tell them how big it is so they kind of have an idea of how good they did at putting it together.
Huh.
So I got to work with a lot of cool people kind of on side projects, whether it be there's some seed beetles, fireflies, a little bit of stuff in forensic entomology, but I kind of designed my own project. I wanted to do more evolutionary biology. So I dug into phylogenetics, or the building or reconstructing of these evolutionary histories.
Yeah.
So what I did is I took that genome data and figured out a way to map it onto an evolutionary tree to see how the amount of DNA changed across genus of flies. And so I specifically worked with Drosophila, the model fruit fly, and
Mm-hmm.
worked with about 150 different species. And so I was able to measure the amount of DNA they had. And a cool aspect is I did it between males and females as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could measure the difference in their genome that would be due to the difference in sex chromosomes they have. They have a similar type of sex chromosome system to humans where males are XY and females are XX.
Okay.
And so I could measure the difference in size is due to females having two X's and males having one X and a Y.
Right.
And so I could then also map how sex chromosomes were changing. And so
Hmm.
that's my PhD project, was really investigating, using these evolutionary trees, how the amount of DNA changed in a specific group of flies.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much here. Yeah, so
Yeah.
let's dive right into the nitty-gritty of what you've been doing recently.
Hmm.
What are you up to right now? And you talked a little
Yeah.
bit about it, but I want you to really get into it. Like what are some of the things you've been finding with those phylogenetic trees you've been working on?
Yeah. Just like I was saying earlier about how nothing seems to follow a rule,
Right.
they're all exceptions. This question of genome size evolution has been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we started figuring out how much DNA things have, we refer to it as this the C value paradox, or C value enigma. This,
Right.
why don't they relate to something like complexity?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all these kind of these intense hypotheses for why this happens. Is it because having a big genome is bad, and so we try to keep it small because it's less stuff to deal with, or is there
Right.
a benefit to that, or is these other types of effects? Is it some type of adaptation to the environment? Certain types of genes expand or contract, and what I find is it depends over and over again. And so when I look at the model fruit flies that I look at, I find a different pattern than if I look at beetles, than if I look at plants, if I look at butterflies, we see different things. And
Mm.
so there tends to be a bunch of exceptions, which I think is super exciting
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a never ending pool of questions we get to dig into.
Yeah.
So what I really like about what I do now is I'm actually at an institution that is primarily undergraduate.
Mm.
So I am in a position where I don't have graduate students that work with me. I have just undergraduate students who are trying to figure out what they want to do and
Mm.
their career path,
Right.
and they want to learn some of these skills. And so most of the stuff I work with is more computational. We get on the computers. This allows students who maybe can't get out in the fields, maybe don't want to touch bugs,
Mm.
they get to have access to doing cool science where they can on their own learn how to learn a new language through coding
Yeah.
and analyze data. And so I work with, I think I have around 6 or 7 students right now, from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some of them are doing field things. I'm working with a current student that I have. We're going out and collecting forensically relevant flies.
Mm.
Only no one's really documented which blowflies are around in Utah.
Hmm.
And so we're going out and just figuring out which flies we have and what kind of data we can work with there. Other students are looking at how climatic variables and environmental variables may or may not be related to the size changes
Mm.
in fly genomes.
Yeah.
Some of them are looking at how chromosome number changes, chromosomes being the what DNA is compacted into. And so how do those numbers change across a tree? Other ones are very computer based and are trying to develop these computational pipelines that allow us to basically say, what species do we have? What genes do we want to look at? And then they just make a whole evolutionary tree through a pipeline.
Right.
And so I get to work with all these brilliant students who are just really just wanting to get into science. And so I just have this kind of crazy number of small projects happening with students, which I think is really fun because, again, that curiosity is infectious.
Mm.
And yeah, so most of my stuff tends to kind of revolve around this question of genome evolution.
Yeah.
And but I tell my students, as long as you're interested in it, let's find a way to do it. I tell them it's probably going to involve bugs because
It's your
they're
thing.
easy to use,
Yep.
and there's so many cool examples, and there's no
Yeah.
shortage of them, and no one cares for the most part if you kill them in the process of your study, right?
Yeah.
Most people actively encourage it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many cool, fun projects that are happening.
That's so awesome. Yeah. So, at Utah Valley University,
Mhm.
how long have you been there? And yeah. So you're working mostly with undergraduate students, right?
Yeah. So I just started my 3rd year, so I'm just finishing up my first semester of my 3rd year here.
Yeah.
Actually, classes just ended last Friday.
Yeah.
So I'm in the midst of just doing a bunch of grading and
Grading. Yeah.
fielding emails about exam questions and studying and grades and things.
Oh yeah.
So I haven't been there too long. I'm in the 10-year process. So I'm like just did my mid 10-year review. But yeah, it's all undergraduates. I mean, I think the largest or one of the largest departments uh, at our university,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been great. It's an awesome institution. It's one of the most affordable, if not the most affordable schools in Utah. It's an open enrollment or open acceptance university
Yeah.
where if you apply, you get in.
Mm-hmm.
We're removing that barrier for students. It's also a dual mission university, so it has a technical school and a trade school. So we have people who are doing like auto mechanics and body
Mm.
work.
That's
At the
awesome.
same time, people are taking, getting degrees in biology and bioinformatics, and now we've got a new zoology program starting
Nice.
this next year. And so really kind of open it up. So we have a lot of kind of what would be considered non-traditional students. So students that are working full-time jobs, that are married with kids and taking care of their families.
Wow.
And so the age of our students tend to be a little bit older than the traditional age that you'd expect for college students. Rather than being like 18 to 22, they're closer to like 25.
Wow. Yeah.
And so
That's awesome.
it's a really unique school and situation, and the school gives a lot of support for the students, which I really love. There's so much funding that they provide for students to apply for research projects and
Wow.
presenting. In my like basically 2.5 years here, I've been able to take students to 3 separate entomology conferences.
Mm-hmm.
I was just brought a student to Maryland, where I ran into you.
Yep.
And I brought a couple of students and a bunch of one of my colleagues' students to Vancouver last year to the
That's
entomology
awesome.
meeting.
Yeah.
And I brought a few students to Seattle to our Pacific branch meeting this past spring as well. And this is the students apply for some funds and the university provides it for them. And so the students are getting to go to these conferences, not having to pay out of pocket. They get to present their own independent research projects, fully supported by the university. And it's not very often that you find that much support
Yeah.
at a school specifically for
I
undergraduates,
was gonna
just
say
because
it's
money
it's
tends to
rare.
be tight,
Yeah.
and they're finding it somehow, and
That's
it's great.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what a awesome you know, what a great opportunity for undergrads because often, undergrads don't usually get to do research. So
No.
that's really
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
I mean,
Um
my experience, undergraduates are washing dishes in labs in most cases,
yeah.
across the university,
Yeah.
and mine are doing all the work. I mean,
That's
they're
really
getting into
awesome.
it, and it's so cool and so rewarding to see these students succeed. It's really incredible.
That's so awesome. Yeah, so you're teaching biology, but you
Mhm.
definitely sneak lots of entomology in. That's
Oh, so
that's
much.
that's really
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, so like what level of biology are you teaching? Is this like a 200 or 300 level course, or are these like the more towards the end of their degree?
I teach all of it,
Okay.
honestly. It's a pretty heavy teaching load,
Mhm.
and I'm lucky that I can sneak bugs in as good examples. And I actually, this next fall, I get to teach the entomology course we have, which is really
Nice.
exciting. But I was hired to teach in the new bioinformatics degree program that we have.
Okay.
One of the few schools that actually have a bioinformatics program, which again is the use of computers to analyze complex biological data. So
Mhm.
a lot of it tends to be genomes and things. But
Mhm.
so I teach an introductory, like 100 level course or 1000 level course that's introduction to bioinformatics. And so it's a non-majors gen ed course. I have computer science majors, I have photography majors, aviation majors. They're taking it for their life science credit. They get to
Yep.
learn a crash course in biology, a bit about genome sequencing, and how to do some coding. They
That's
learn how
awesome.
to make their own plots and analyze data and have fun projects like their final project is a Lord of the Rings based project that I made.
Really?
Yeah, so JRR contacts them with data about the Oliphant, and so they have to analyze this data about this giant pachyderm. But otherwise, I teach genetics, which is a 3,000 level course, a 300 level course. I teach genomics and evolution, which are both 4,000 level courses. And then entomology is a zoology course that's that 2 to 3,000 level range. And so I've anywhere in the range, I'm teaching courses, which which is kind of fun because
Yeah.
you tend to see some of the same students that come through. They take your intro class, they really like it, and so then they start taking other of your courses. And
Nice.
so it's cool that I get to see these students kind of as they track through their degree
Yeah.
and how they've improved in their coursework. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of fun. Um, yeah, so let's go to you a little bit.
Yeah.
How did you originally get into entomology? Was it that was it before your undergrad, or was it sometime during, or when did you
Yeah.
originally get into that?
That's a really good question. It's been something I think about a lot because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I didn't really wasn't really into entomology for long, but I wasn't aware it was an area that you could go into. I mean,
Mm.
I was a kid. I have three brothers, and we played around in the dirt outside, right?
Yeah.
We did things that were definitely probably torturous to insects,
Yeah.
not intentionally torturous. We thought Daddy Longlegs, for example, would love to swim in a pool.
Mm-hmm.
So we put them in buckets of water and then
Yep.
wondered why they died.
Yep.
We built Lego houses for crickets.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, the crickets didn't really like being stuck and confined in a Lego house,
Ugh.
but we tried to give them a cool house with multiple levels and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of fell away for a while. I mean, I didn't really think about it, and there's all these pressures as you go through schooling and you do well in biology. People are like, "Oh, you're going to go into medicine,
Right.
right? Because that's what you do with biology."
Right.
And my family's academic background is I'm not a first generation student. My dad went to college. He's a computer programmer. But other than that, it's just, farmers, truckers, handymen, things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
college was a whole new ball game to me. And like going into biology, because I wanted to, I'm like, okay, it has to be medicine. And then within my first year, I'm like, no, it's going to be I'm gonna dig into this research thing, and it
Mm-hmm.
just turns out insects are a great model. I mean, I had a little bit of a teaser to that with some of the labs we had in my undergraduate, but the big push was that REU that I got,
Yeah.
and so I'm entomology by way of grad school,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting because I meet all these people in grad school who did the whole 4-H FFA. They've been all in on bugs since they were like 5 years old.
Right.
And for me, I'm learning about it I was in my 20s is when I really got into the nitty gritty of it. And coming it from a genetics and evolution background, it's an interesting thing because I use them as models primarily.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're just fantastic and super cool, and I love getting out there and collecting bugs or being in the lab working with them. But it's one of the hardest questions people ask me all the time is, "What's your favorite insect?"
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
They all came at me all at once. And there's too many cool things that they do.
Yeah.
So entomology was, I guess, I didn't know it was a thing. And I
Yeah.
think I try to tell my students about it all the time. There are careers out there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I learned that entomologists are biologists with jobs, right?
Yeah.
There's so many career paths that we need,
Absolutely.
whether it's medical related, agricultural related,
Yep.
veterinary. Like there are always going to be jobs for entomologists.
Yes.
We can't deny that.
Yeah.
And so it's cool to be able to kind of foster that type of excitement or introduce that to people. My entomology program, PhD program, has a really big undergraduate entomology program,
Mm-hmm.
and it's considered to be what they call a discovery major. They
Mm.
have very few people who come into school going, "I'm going to be an entomology major." They graduate way more entomology majors than ever come in as an entomology major because
Mm.
people discover it partway
Wow.
through. They didn't realize you can get a whole degree in bugs,
Yeah.
and it's such a cool thing. That kind of discovery. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what we're all about here is introducing people to entomology before they get into school,
yeah,
so that that's
yeah,
that's even an option, right? Um,
100%.
yeah, for sure. So cool. So, let's go on to who kind of inspired you, or like who do you look up to, either within the world of science or otherwise? Like who's your kind of inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many cool people out there that it's easy to get wrapped up in, and I find as I get further in my career, the more I dig into the history of things, I get really excited about different people. Like I gave a talk to my university about Alfred Russel Wallace
Yeah.
recently, for example.
Yep.
Really cool guy, kind of broke barriers in terms of he was a working class person. He funded his way to do research and just for the sake of digging into these questions of evolution. But on a more personal level, I would have to say that one of my biggest inspirations and people that I go to the most is my PhD advisor, Spencer Johnston.
Okay.
He's a brilliant man. He just retired, I guess a year ago.
Hmm.
So he's the geneticist, the population geneticist, and he retired. He's now 79 is how old he is. So he retired late 70s.
Wow.
And he never stopped being active in science.
Yeah.
He's publishing constantly, collaborating constantly. When I go to meetings, people are asking me how he's doing, and like they're going to email him about more work
Nice.
because he's an endlessly curious person.
Yeah.
And I think that's the super inspiring thing is that always curious. He was never asking questions to try to put anybody down.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a brilliant person. He was
Mm-hmm.
just curious. And he gave me a lot of support, as I was trying to discover who I was as a person and a scientist in my 20s. And so he's one of my biggest inspirations. We actually had an award one year that in our entomology program that was essentially he's the person that we want to be when we grow up.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think he's just fantastic. I had a really great couple of postdoc advisors that have been really great too. My second postdoc advisor, Heath Blackman, he's in the biology department at Texas A&M. He's very into beetles, so much that his email address is colioguy at
Nice.
gmail.com. And he really opened my mind to a lot of the way I kind of pursue my mentoring
Mm-hmm.
of people as well. And so his first question of his students and of me was, where do you want to be? And how can I help you get there?
Yeah.
Because we both view ourselves successful if we can help others get to where they want to be.
Right.
And so I think that those are probably my two biggest kind of inspirations for people that I've worked with for sure, just because they both had interesting paths to get where they're at. And the stories are always incredible. My PhD advisor did his PhD in Arizona, just taking his Volkswagen camper van through the deserts of Arizona and Mexico,
Yeah.
collecting cactophilic fruit flies.
Nice.
So things are just feeding on dead cactus, and
Yeah.
wild stories about being on Caribbean NSF cruise ships or spending decades in Hawaii, like hiking up mountains to collect crazy flies.
Wow.
And it's just that career that just is endlessly exciting. I mean, it's never the same each day. And I think that's one of the most appealing things about digging into this area is it's not on repeat. There's always something new.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I say this all the time, but you could learn about a new insect every single day and you would never get bored. Like, it's just
Yeah.
endless.
You'd never run out of insects either.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, Carl, what are some other of like activities and like hobbies that you enjoy in your spare time, whether it's related or not to
Yeah.
entomology or biology?
Yeah, it's a really great question. You can kind of see a little bit in the background. I don't know how much depends on how big the video is.
Yeah.
I've got some guitars over here.
Nice.
So I'm actually, I guess, what would be considered a classically trained musician. So
Okay.
I had a scholarship in my undergraduate where I played bass, like upright bass, the really big instrument in the orchestra. So
Wow.
throughout my undergraduate, I took private lessons on bass and I played in a number of different symphonies. And in grad school, my PhD advisor said that I had to play in the university orchestra
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't give up on doing all this extra music stuff I did. So
Yep.
I was the only graduate student in Texas A&M's college orchestra. And so I would do that on top of teaching and doing my research and taking classes. And so through that, I have been teaching myself guitar. So I've got about 6 guitars or so over here, just kind of different
Wow.
tunings and styles. So music is a really big thing for me, whether that's playing or going to concerts or listening to music, all genres. I mean, the switch ups that I have in my playlists are the whiplash would be the best way to describe it. I
Yeah.
mean, it goes from like thrash metal to folk music to a Beethoven symphony
Oh
to
man.
musicals.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. I love that I live in Utah now too. I'm very into the outdoors. I mean, collecting insects is a great thing to do, but
Yeah.
I grew up in a very, very flat, cold place in
Right.
eastern South Dakota. It's all
Mm-hmm.
corn and beans as far as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to College Station, Texas, which is
The
flat
opposite.
and incredibly hot.
Incredibly hot. Yep.
And now I'm in Utah, where it's not as hot as Texas, not as cold as South Dakota. I get four seasons, and I'm 10 minutes away from being in the
Yeah.
mountains.
Not flat.
Like,
Yep.
and so I do a ton of hiking and camping. My dog, he's sleeping right behind me right
Yeah.
now. He goes on a lot of adventures with me. So we, even if it's just a couple hours on the weekend, I've got a couple hour window. There's trails I can go up and hike to an overlook over the city. So I try to get out there, do that type of activity, hiking, maybe do some camping,
Nice.
which has been a blast.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just try to find other things, trying to get back into reading after graduate school. You can get kind of burnt out on
Yeah.
reading all those papers. And
Reading
so
for
trying to read for
fun.
fun,
Yep.
that's been really good. So it's been a goal. I've got a list of books on my whiteboard that I'm keeping track of with all the books that I've read in the last year or so,
Nice.
just to try to keep it fun and exciting. So find some way to fill my time. If I'm not grading or teaching or
Mm.
researching with students,
Yeah.
do something outside of what I would normally do. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, looking forward to the future. You just got
Mhm.
started at Utah Valley, but what are some other like goals and plans that you have uh ahead of you? Like any trips or research that you want to do moving
Yeah.
forward? Like what are your big plans?
Yeah. My big plans are to keep working on this stuff. So I have so since my PhD advisor retired, I've kind of taken the helm of like doing these genome size estimations, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
So that means I get to open up all these cool scientists I get to work with. So they'll be sending me data, and I get to work on all sorts of cool projects.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I'm excited about. Is who knows where that'll take me.
Yeah.
But I've got some collaborations with some friends at like Arizona State, for example. We've got all sorts of collecting that we're planning, where we're going to go through all around the state of Utah and some of Arizona
Mm-hmm.
and collect all these blowflies. So I get to do some field work because I find myself kind of cooped up in a lab or on the computer.
Nice. Yeah.
I got some cool projects with my postdoc advisor where we're going to be collecting things like beetles in Arizona. Yeah, so I mean, I'll take whatever I can get for trips. I'd love to plan. So in the back of my mind is to plan a study abroad trip
Yeah.
to focus on things like evolution and probably doing insect stuff. I mean, that's kind of the big one. It, at Texas A&M, they have this cool yearly thing where the entomology students go to Dominica and they collect insects and they develop their own little research projects and they discover new species.
Mm.
And it's just fun. I'd love to have more of that going on. And so I'm
Yeah.
working with some of my colleagues in the department. We have a really big department. I didn't mention, but Utah Valley University is the largest public university in Utah. We
Mm.
have more than 40,000 students at the university.
Wow.
And so we have a really big department. And so we have never specifically hired an entomologist, but we've ended up with entomologists,
Yeah.
which is really fun. So my department chair, he studies mayflies. And so we have a lot of different projects. I'm taking over entomology from him. And then we have people who study plant insect interactions, people who study plant viruses that are vectored by insects,
Mm.
and then like other colleagues that are doing behavior and using ants as models.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to find a way that we can kind of all work together on maybe doing some type of big field expedition is kind of a really big goal of mine as well. Yeah, just keep doing science for the sake of science. That's my goal. Never stop learning.
Great goal. Yeah. Super exciting stuff. Yeah, well, right before we wrap it up here, where can we go to learn more about like what you've been working on?
Yeah.
Maybe the school website, or if you have any social media, just where could we go to learn more?
Yeah, so I mean, you could certainly look up my name. It's a unique name, Hjelmen, Hjelmen.
Mm-hmm.
If you look up Carl Hjelmen, I think there's basically three people with that name that ever come up.
Yeah.
There's myself, my dead great great uncle who I was named after,
Okay.
and some random dude in Norway who took the Twitter handle I wanted.
Oh.
Uh, and so if you look at my name, the first I don't know how many pages of Google comes up with results about me.
Okay.
But I do have a website. It's housed through GitHub, so it's cehjelmen.github.io. So that's a website that I coded. It's got information about the courses I teach, the research. It has PDFs of all the publications that I have,
Nice.
my kind of overarching goals for research, ways to contact me, both in terms of my school email and my professional Gmail address. Got my calendar. Everything is embedded there. I'm on, I guess it's called X
Yep.
now.
Yep.
I've got that. I think it's CE Gelman 09 is my handle there. It's the
Yep.
same handle I have on Blue Sky, which
Okay.
is another one. And then I do have Instagram. It's linked in my um, on my website as well. That tends
Yeah.
to be a lot of just hiking and dog photos and, throwing those fun bug and plant photos and stuff too as they come along.
Nice.
But
Nice.
that I think is just Carl Gelman is the handle for that.
Yep.
So all sorts of things. I make it available for people to see because you might as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So plenty of options.
Sweet. Yeah, and I will leave the links to all of those in the show notes for you guys. The description of this episode. But well, Carl, thank you so much for being on the show. This was super fun. You are working on some really awesome stuff. Obviously, just killing it. Super nice to get to know you. Thank you so much for being on the show. So, this was really fun. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you. This is awesome. I really like that you're doing this. I mean, this type of outreach is one of the most important things. I mean, like we said, we got to get people excited about it. And this is such an awesome, cool thing. I was very excited to learn about it when I was at ESA this year. So thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Oh, of course. Yeah, super fun. Thank you so much.